Hello and welcome to another episode of Tradecraft Tuesday. This is the show where we take hacker techniques and we break them down and we kind of try to tell you how it works and how you can defend yourself. So we got a special guest today. We got Tom Lawrence.
Hey.
So anybody who's not familiar with Tom's you own an MSP. You also do a lot of like your own videos and podcasts and
YouTube and all that fun stuff. I share a lot of what we do, how we do it. No secrets, lots of transparency, because it's about making the market better. Right? That's why I align with these guys really well. It's about sharing a lot of the knowledge and things like that. Yeah,
exactly. A lot of people ask us like, "Oh, how I bet you can't tell me how Huntress works or how this or that." We're like, "Oh yeah, we'll tell you, of course." Mm-hmm. It's not a secret. Like if you ever go to a vendor and they're like, "No, it's a secret sauce how our stuff works. We can't tell you." Like, run away.
People are already asking, did he drive that sexy Tesla? He flew in.
But next time, I'll come in the summer and drive the Tesla. Yeah. The range is better in the summer, and else it turns out.
I'm not surprised. So yeah, I think Kyle mentioned it before, but for anybody who's here, who's just showing up, if you're on, we have chat. Chat is great, but if you ask a question and you want us to answer it or consider it on the thing, go ahead and use the Q&A feature of Zoom. That way we can see them and we can see when they've been answered and that kind of good stuff. But it's a very interactive show. So if you have questions, please throw them out there. I'm sure today, based on this topic, we're going to get a lot of people saying like, "Hey, I have this situation. What would you recommend?" Or "I have that situation." So if you have that kind of stuff, throw it our way.
So you're going to tease the topic a little bit, or are we going to do a little bit of news?
That's a good question. Let's just do the news first, and then we'll jump into it.
Okay. All right. So things have been active, right? It's always active every month. And we come to the conclusion that sometimes it's not even the most exciting stuff, right? It's only so often you could hear breach du jour. But the reality is some of the breaches actually hit in a lot of like IT departments' backyards this month, especially even MSPs. So I guess I could begin a little bit of screen sharing, but the one that bothered me the most, and I know we pre-gamed a little bit of this, but let me screen share it. For those who haven't seen CSO Online, they managed to share that where their featured article and data breach section was, "Is your MSP an insider threat?" Which,
wow, controversial, right? Like,
it's definitely going to get headlines. It's going to get clicks. There's no doubt about that.
They threw that out there knowing that people would be like, "Are you serious?" And they would read it. Although on the other hand, I don't think it's necessarily clickbaity.
Yeah, it's true, right? It's in this scenario, they actually go and laid out, if for those that haven't seen the story's not old, right? We're talking about November 19th. So just after our last episode last month, but they called out that one of the largest like IT services firms in Spain had a subsidiary that was compromised, right? And so we're getting, subscribe now, please subscribe now. But what was the stuff that really caught me off guard was it wasn't just the typical, hey, MSP provides services to many, small, medium-sized business IT departments. The hackers got a little bit crafty with the way they targeted their payloads. So for the ones that leaked out onto Twitter, this was probably one of my favorite ones, which the ransomware message itself, even for the affected client, started out with, "Hey, Everest." So I don't know about you, but I would probably, you already feel bad enough if you might have helped facilitate ransomware to a company. To have my name, if it said, "Hello, Huntress," and it was everyone a partner, like the worst case scenario, right? It's adding insult and injury. So that one bothered me a whole lot, but they, not only in the message itself, if you take a look at the ransomware sample, I think this one came from the Malwarebytes team. They actually called out the file extension for all the encrypted documents, images, etc., was leet speak for Everest.
Yeah.
So
that's a good smack right there.
Yeah, that's
just they're bold. We had that ransomware where they had actually called the insurance company after they ransomed. They bypassed the MSP, they ransomed, and then this happened in Florida. They knew who the insurance provider was, so they called the insurance provider. So when the IT company started to call the insurance, like, "Oh, we've been on the phone with them, we're already negotiating." I'm like, "How?" And they're like, "They called us."
Oh man,
holy cow!
That's efficiency.
Cutting out the middle, and this was BitPaymer, by the way, for those who hadn't seen some of this, but we had recognized this template before, and sadly actually dealt with this in the same exact case. And the ones we've dealt with internally at Huntress, the ransomware samples and the actual file extensions were tailored to the targeted customer. So definitely not the first time we've seen it. First time it's made public news that I've seen it at this scale. So that went down, right? So for those that are watching or participating in chat, I've already thrown a copy of the link to this CSO online in there. I'll make sure it gets in there. But this wasn't the only case where things went from bad to ugly. I think we actually saw another one of an IT provider, right? This is not much different than what we saw from, was it the PercySoft incidents where, yeah, lots of dental providers getting compromised through software. And this appears to be another one. Looks like Colorado-based MSP or IT service provider. And what they say, 100 dental offices?
Yeah, 100, yeah.
That's still less than a PerkSoft, which is over 400 dental offices.
Right.
Oh boy, so that's rough. In addition to it, it was, what is almost old school, as we've talked about it over and over on here. This was the same exact example we saw before, which was Soda Nikibi or Revel, used to call command.exe, used to call PowerShell.
Revel?
I think R Evil.
Yeah, I thought it was R Evil, but I didn't know.
I mean, Kaza, I'm not going to split hairs on stuff like that. But what we're getting at is these things that we talked about for the last several months now just continue to escalate. With that said, one more, I guess, departing thought, though, was it's also ransomware has continued to evolve, and we continue, it's one thing to see the attacks and how this affects companies, but it's also the actors. And I think last month we were just doing ransomware as a service. This is one of the first times that I've seen at least ransomware switched up gears. So this was Snatch. I think we did a little bit of research. It didn't seem to be like the most popular ransomware as a service or, attack platform. But what do we see? Roughly a year that they've been at it with Snatch
it looks like it's been around based on like uploads to ID ransomware. So for anybody not familiar, there's a service called ID ransomware where if you get ransomed, you can take the ransomware note and you can upload it to the service that ID ransomware provides, and they'll tell you what ransomware it is based on kind of the template, the words that they use, and then they will tell you like if there are any available decryptors. So, if you get hit with like an old sample of like GAN crab or something, like Pre 5.2, then you could decrypt it, but some of the others are not decryptable. But based on uploads there, it looks like this has been around since 2018.
Yeah, something like that. Definitely
but
a year.
It doesn't look like anybody really caught on to it or like it had that many infections until recently when they found it. And they found some really interesting like new technology that they added to it.
Yeah, one of the ones that impressed me the most was, they're dumping obviously some process memory. LSAS typically is going to store like, Kerberos credentials, things like that. But I think the one I was most impressed was their use and abuse of Windows services and the feature to automatically run some of these. I think they called it Super Backup Man.
Super Backup Man.
Yeah, and said, you know what?
That's a good logo.
Even after safe boot, when this boots in safe mode, all the antivirus personal security products are going to be disabled, right? That's the idea, I believe, behind this.
Yeah.
But, I'm going to make sure that the service still runs, which kicks off the ransomware. So never-ending evolution. What we're going to say, though, is I think with today's topic, right? Today's topic is, exciting. It's a little bit different than what we've done. We've talked about very specific tradecraft, but we kind of realized that a lot of people weren't so sure, how do attackers choose a target? Why do they choose a target? Like, why did that service provider in Colorado get hit? Why did that MSP in Spain get hit? That's not really talked about a whole lot. And I know, Chris, you put on your marketing hat. You came up with leveling up your security, thinking like an attacker.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on the topic?
I mean, a lot of that was based off of like an email, and Tom and I had back and forth where I emailed Tom and said, hey, what kind of stuff are you seeing? What kind of questions are you getting? Like, what do you want to talk about? And what Tom kind of responded with was like, hey, how do we talk about like MSPs and their security posture in general? Like, we've talked about specific stuff, but in general.
Yeah, in general, and the thing like attacker, there's sometimes a mistake where people think they target you based on who you are versus the reverse is true, because that's the hard way to do it. I mean, it's not that they couldn't, but that's a lot more work. And they're a business. Even though they're attackers, they are running like a business. They're going to look for the most efficient way to get something done. Hence the road to attacking MSPs, because, well, that's a skill. And, instead of trying to individually just attack each of these places, I hit the MSP and I have 400 dental offices or 100 dental offices, economy of scale. But then how do we find it? And this is the whole how to the position. And we're going to share some of the tools and tradecraft they use in order to target, because we're sort of how they start with the targeting before they start with the name. Figuring out who you are is like just a step in the process. Right.
Yeah. Once they have access to your computers, then they figure out who you are. Then it kind of escalates to the next level. But like you were saying, like they're not the attacker's not like, oh, I know about this MSP in New Jersey, I need to go after them. I mean, you might have that for like, prior employees or people who really just like hate you, but in most terms, it's like the attacker's just looking for the best bang for their buck. So they're gonna, spray their attack out there as wide as they can, hoping to get as many people as possible.
Yeah, and the other thing too we're going to show is there's so much low-hanging fruit out there.
Yes.
Yes. We actually had too much fun looking for this because it was like, which one do we pick? It wasn't like there's one company we found. We did vector in on one for the demonstration here, but in redacted information. But there's a lot of them out there. There's a lot of scary stuff out there.
Yeah. So basically, the idea here is like, and Kyle and I had talked about this before. Is like, can we make some kind of like a checklist of like, I'm an MSP. I have security stack. I have AV. I have maybe like a EDR and MDR. What other stuff should I be looking at? Should I be doing to make sure my security posture is good and make sure that I'm not the low-hanging fruit, right? You don't have to be perfect. Nobody's going to be perfect. I mean, like look at some of the big banks and stuff. They've been hacked. You just got to be not the low-hanging fruit. And so like, how do we help you figure out what stuff to look at and so you can fix that?
So, I mean, one of this started out as we were throwing out terrible names and terrible explanations. I'll do some screen sharing real quick just to get us on, a little bit on topic. But when we look at this, I started putting together a crude slide that looked like thinking like an attacker, right? And there's a lot of things wrong with thinking like an attacker. And one of the things that I picked up on was I'm not the first to say like, look, in this exact example, there was a great researcher from South Africa. I think he's actually CEO of Thinks, if I recall. Thinks Haroon Mir gave a presentation a couple years back. But he literally said, like, look, we are learning the wrong lessons from offense. So there's been years of us saying, please think like an attacker. But the reality is sometimes that's hard. And so as I dove deeper in what Haroon's talk actually highlighted, we've kind of been talking about thinking like an attacker for over 20 some years. Even some of the earliest Sun Microsystems engineers had written blogs about let's think like an attacker, but most people just don't know how to do it. And they dove into a couple things like, look, most people don't know what matters to an attacker. Mm-hmm. We don't know how attacker even spends their day. That's part of the reason that we're hanging out on Tradecraft Tuesday was for us to expose how do hackers actually do this stuff. And one of the things that hit me real close to home was how does an attacker approach a problem? So even in Chris, what he was just mentioning is we wanted to initially come up with this idea of here's this checklist. We realized it was more along the lines of what we wanted to distill to you was a thought process that helps produce, for instance, a checklist of what to do, right? How did we get to these conclusions? And more importantly, we ended up realizing that telling somebody like think like an attacker just is not prescriptive enough, right? It's not clear enough on what you to do. And the one piece that hit me right where it counts was like this, like, hey, Kyle, just think like a chef. Yeah. And this is what you'd get out of me if you asked me to make better food and told me to just think like a chef. I would be the one burning my kitchen down. So I think that's probably a pretty good place for us to maybe start, right? We were probably learning the wrong lessons in the past about it. And with that said, how to find targets, right? That's where we wanted to start this episode of Tradecraft Tuesday. And I think the guys already mentioned, it usually isn't like I'm starting with Everest and my end goal is going to be deliver ransomware to you. That might be the final effect, but that's not how we got here. So, one of the ways that Microsoft said was like, look, defenders think in lists, the checkbox we talked about earlier, attackers think in graph and how we get there. And I think the best way we can do this is maybe some storytelling, a little bit about how we get here. So does somebody want to take it away while I, I'll quit screen sharing for a second, but Tom, you've been doing this for a long time, Windows, Linux, you name it, you've been breaking stuff just like us. Do you ever, or do hackers ever just start with like, oh, I'm going after all of Everest's computers or?
No, it's always, looking at the products used and then going in and say things like, well, we started with Shodan today. And, digging in, poking at something, that there's a way in, and you're not starting with, like I said, you never pick the name. You don't pick the product. You're like, oh, that's interesting because it does this, or it's how, let me think how to describe it better. You somehow caught me off guard.
Yeah, no worry. But somebody's already even in here in our chat threw out Shodan immediately of like, look, these hackers start broad, right? Mm-hmm. It's targets of opportunity for a lot of victims.
Yeah. And it's who has something open. Those are, if you've left something open, you have an old website, you have a website doesn't look new, you're not using SSL search, you don't have a link to like Screen Connect. Is, you know, we're not picking on any brand, we just know that's been used in a couple of them because it's popular. It's not because it's flawed. Matter of fact, none of these are tools flaws at all. These are all misconfigurations of said tools or lack of taking the time to secure these tools with two-factor. So you'll start with, like, let's find everyone using this. Let's find everyone using Screen Connect. All right, let's narrow it down. Who has RDP open?
Right.
We were finding, and it's just guessing at usernames like CW admin and things like that. We're not spending too much time thinking about it, and it yielded enough results to immediately find targets. So it's not like you start with these broad attacks or really focusing in, like you said, on some specifically company in some geographic area because you know they support dental offices. You're like, look, I stumbled across this. Oh, they happen to have dental offices.
Right.
Look at that.
I
That's
think
interesting.
You want me to demonstrate some of this live, Tom, while you're talking and sharing
Sure.
some of this story? I can log into Shodan since somebody mentioned it. We had some Shodan slides anyways, so this seemed like a good natural pivot here. So for those that have never seen Shodan, one, there's free accounts. They're pretty limited, right? But even if you're paying for it, what is it, like 60 bones a month or something US?
Yeah, $60 a month. It's nothing. You can actually scan your client's IP base with this and stuff like that. And I didn't realize, as Chris pointed this out earlier, if you are using Shodan Scan, it doesn't seem to tell you exactly how frequently it scans.
Yeah. You're at the mercy of when Shodan added it. A lot of these actually say added. If I'm looking on what I'm screen sharing real quick, I guess I can zoom in just a little bit. But they say they were added today. So somewhere along the line, their crawler is doing a good job.
So kind of the backstory on Shodan is I think their tagline is a search engine for the internet. Basically what they've got is a bunch of machines out there that are just hitting every single available IP address, and they try to hit a bunch of ports. I don't know if they try to hit everything, but they have this big list of ports that they try to hit. And then they actually wrote some interesting little extensions to that when they would see a specific port open that had some service, they would try to talk to it. Holy cow, that's a lot of ports.
That's a lot of ports.
But like they would try to talk to it. Like if they noticed it was like 80 or 443, they'd try to make an HTTP request to it and see what they could get back.
Well, and they also show, one of the things you can see here is people say, oh, I put it on 7443, not 443.
Right.
Did you just see one of these 7443 right here in the list?
Yeah. And they're giving you the header that's replied there, and it's showing that security through obscurity. They kind of throw that out the door as they realize people put things on our ports, but they're actually filtering by the port. So one of the search queries you can do in Shodan is for a specific thing. Like we were playing with VNC unauthenticated, and even if you move the VNC onto a different port, it's still Shodan finds it because it's searching for the header, not even the port number.
I've got a whole bunch of these that we put together earlier. We before we even got to Shodan, right? We were playing with
authenticated disabled.
Oh gosh, this is so. Anybody want to give a rundown? I know most of our audience is going to know what VNC is, but I'll start spinning this up while you guys share it.
So VNC's been around forever. Man, it's been like the earliest tools I used in the remote access. It seems like it was like 1999. I don't know when it came out, but it feels like it was that long ago. It could have been.
Like Easy VNC or Free VNC.
Easy VNC and all the other ones, all the derivatives. But what this allows you to do is remote access to computers. It was before remote desktop was as popular as it is. And remote desktop, of course, the more commercialized version for Microsoft built in. But there's a ton of people still using it. And sometimes technicians are like this. They get to where they really like a tool. They keep using it even 20 years later. And they may have not updated it in 20 years.
Right.
And to go a step further, there's been a huge rash of, I think that it was the Sophos team that audited and found a ton of vulnerabilities in it that was recently published. And the VNC team said, we're not fixing any of these because they're old. But by just querying authentication disabled, which is part of when VNC, if you don't have authentication on it, we'll give that. By just querying for that as a command string that comes back, you get stuff like this. And of course, you get even more fun, you get this. This is something that shouldn't be online at all.
I don't know about you, but if I'm taking a look at just doing that same query we did earlier, authentication disabled, looking for VNC, and I start seeing SCADA ICS systems over some type of like
in Atlanta
wireless 4G system. Oh gosh, this is clearly a bad day for anybody. But the idea behind this, right, isn't terrifying. Attackers might not even started their day saying, "I'm going to target somebody's, what is this, a water system?"
Yeah,
something.
You know, and we look, there's all kinds of other ones. I was scrolling, ironically, it looks like Shodan actually is barfing. We might have sent enough traffic to Shodan right now that it's fallen over. But the idea behind it is there's almost endless number of these. Look at this. Somebody's like BNC to maybe their thermostat, you know, system, heating system in Italy.
Heating system.
Yeah. And authentication disabled. So you know where this is going. These are just right targets. So you might just be one of those unfortunate targets. And we had a whole bunch, didn't we, earlier, that we were just playing with like simple things of like, you know, obviously we saw some MSPs were in there.
Yeah, well, if you do a port 8040 on there, you'll get even more because there's a lot of with Screen Connect, and goes back to the targeting. So if you see where it says, before you scroll that, server Screen Connect 19.3255, if you type in, you can do in Shodan searches for specific ones. And let's say we look for an old version of Screen Connect. And why would that make a good target? Well, if you don't update your infrastructure, you're an easier target. I'm like, well, they don't care. They're running a version from 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 4 years ago. They're probably not good. Their OPSEC isn't good. Their security posture is bad. That just picks them up to be an easier target.
Say I don't scroll a single point further, and we always give that analogy of outrunning the bear. Like if I have a choice between these three computers right now, and I've got somebody on 19.4 and somebody on 19.3, I'm probably going after 19.3. Reality is I might just spend 2 more seconds and go after somebody that's on 6.2 down here, or 6.3, or you know, something along those lines. But I mean, that's the visual representation. And what's cool about this is it's December.
Yeah.
If you're in an IT department, tickets should start to slow down. MSP, fingers crossed, things start to slow down. This is your chance to think like an attacker this, you know, holiday season, right? Whether it's Christmas, Kwanzaa, Hanukkah, whatever it's slowing down for. Use this time to maybe assess your own network, right? That's a good way to think like an attacker, is maybe start out with your own network range and move on.
Yeah. So, and I'll go a step further to say one more thing. We're doing this kind of the script kiddie method, show you how to drop a few things in here. Anyone who's a more advanced threat actor, Shodan has a complete Python library where this can be command line and automated. It will completely produce reports, run a command line. You can just go to GitHub. There's a bunch of people that wrote integrations to automate the scraping of Shodan and then databasing the results. So I can like have my pick of targets. I guess have this tool that runs and like I need a little more ransomware today. Let's see who's my list. What did Shodan release to me today?
That's what kind of the way that like attackers use Shodan is they'll look for companies to announce a vulnerability was patched, or they'll look for somebody to release proof of concept vulnerability, like, you know, exploits. They'll go on places like Exploit DB and look for stuff. And then once they have a tool that they can use, then they go and find potential victims who are running affected versions of the software. It's generally not the other way around unless somebody's specifically targeting you, like we were showing where they might say like, hey, this one has 6.3, let me go and find if there's a vulnerability, you know, for that. A lot of times it's the opposite. It's like, okay, I need, like Tom was saying, I need to deploy more ransomware, I need to make more money. Okay, I have this exploit, who can I use it against? And I can go to Shodan and I can find a ton of targets, and you don't want to be on that target list.
Yeah, I mean, we've actually talked with hackers on the dark web who sell access to like IT departments and MSPs and things like that. And they flat out have convinced us why it's such a good like market, like telling us like, oh no, thinking that we're also hackers, not realizing that we're defenders here, saying like, oh no, these are great targets and it's great for paying. And they often have insurance. And sometimes you can find the insurance they use it ahead of time. I've never heard of any case where the insurance got called in advance, but that is hilarious.
Called in advance, I thought it was amazing.
But even some of them, like you said, it starts out with a news headline. One that I was just sharing was Urgent 11. This was a couple months ago, right? It was VxWorks was the OS that there was a whole bunch of vulnerabilities for. This could be the beginning of where you get targeted, of like this company Armis came out and said, look, all kinds of vulnerabilities in embedded systems. And they talked about real-time operating systems. They actually talk about on here, look, Shodan has all kinds of sonic wall devices, which is also targeted and exploitable. But even if you had no access to Shodan, you know, if we were really going ghetto, we started this morning of saying, how would we do what these attackers were doing?
Google dorking.
Yeah, well, yeah, good old-fashioned Google search, right? Hey, in URL or in title, I want to do a search. Hey, Google, you know, yes, I'm not a robot. I'm just a shady hacker. And you look, you've got endless amounts of list of, here's somebody's, I'm sure, we'll just click one of them, right? Somebody's web-based management portal for one of these.
Oh. The cert's bad.
Bad cert on SSL. And here's the network appliance, right? It's even scarier when you start seeing Dell Sonic Wall, right? So we dug a little bit deeper, right? Is this a good time to maybe we're talking about this now? Instead of like right now, we're just doing surface area. Here's one attack surface.
Right.
But maybe we could share a little bit about like what our playing earlier, right? Without breaking any laws, just looking from the outside. I saw somebody that might be showed up and showed in. Now I want to dig a little bit more.
Yeah.
Does that work?
What's that next step? Let's walk you through that.
So I'm going to go use some magic here with good old-fashioned PowerPoint, right? And so we've got the example auditing, and we talked about before all kinds of ways to get in here. And this was one, right, Tom, we started with earlier.
Yep,
it was just poking. You want to walk us through maybe where you started poking and where we started talking?
Yeah, so it started with a Screen Connect. We see they've got that open, and they've got 3389. And nice thing, showed in, it will scrape the actual screenshot without us doing anything. We did not log into anything. That's where the line can get crossed.
Right,
Nothing was logged into.
And when we were scrolling through some of the Shodan reports there were IP addresses and stuff. Do not connect to any of those. Depending on where you live, you may go to jail for that.
Yeah.
So,
the law may affect you once you logged into any of these. This is 100% passive, which the other thing, by the way, passive means they have no idea we did this. This company is completely unaware, even if they, and I'm positive they don't, but even if they had full logging of everything, they didn't see us because the only thing they seen was a Shodan index. And one of the first things you notice here too, Shodan is kind enough to list all these CVEs. And if you're not familiar with the way the CVE system works, 2012, they are running Apache 2.2.
Yeah, that's the year.
That's
2012.
2012's year, and Apache 2.2 that just deprecated a little while ago, so that's we should not be running that.
And there's a whole bunch more, right? The Apache CVE list goes on and on.
Oh yeah, it's huge.
And to be fair, some of these CVEs will apply, some of these don't.
False positives galore.
A lot of times Shodan does not have enough specific details to figure out if the CVE applies or not. It's just going to check the version and say, this could apply to Apache 2.2.
Right.
But in the details, you might find out like, oh, it only applies to Apache 2.2 if they have this configuration and this thing's set. And so
but it does there. And by the way, this is another search you can do, Shodan. You can search by CVE. So once again, for targets, like an exploits out there, you can search by that CVE.
But just be careful because like the potential is like as a
false positives.
Yeah, false positives is you could show this to your boss or your client, or they could come to you with this and say, hey, how come I'm not protected from this CVE? And you might be just the potential false positives.
So I'm going to keep narrating then. I'm going to be if we said thinking like an attacker isn't prescriptive or clear enough, but showing how attackers solve problems. Clearly this attacker didn't start out with a checklist. It was like step 1, go after FooBar IT here, right? And this is just some company's IT department that had this Apache server. We started in our graph. We did some Shodan searches. All right, gents, you've now got new indicators. You see there's some CVEs and you see port 80, 443, and 3389. I imagine you probably dig a little bit deeper.
Yeah, and then I think what I highlighted here, and we blurred it all out because we don't want to actually list the company here. But would you just grab their SSL cert because that'll tell me their website name right away. So now they have their website name. I have information about them. Like now I know who they are. This is the first time I found out who they are, by the way, because now we've done all this targeting to find the potential victim. And now I'm figuring out who they are. So like I said, this is that reverse of which side comes first. So we have that. So we're going to go to the website and actually look to make sure that the Screen Connect server's up, check it, stuff like that.
Yeah. So, I mean, we had Screen Connect. We had we had RDP also on 3389.
If you scroll down a little further, this is a screenshot from the RDP server. And I blurred out, they actually had 2 people's names showing in here on the login page. So that was great too. Right, look at the RDP server. We see the ConnectWise admin. Then we see administrator. And I think ConnectWise admin might have been the search string we were actually searching for to even pop this company up. But like I said, there's a lot of different ways you can look for it.
So if you pivoting from whether Screen Connect and, for instance, one of those users, was logged in, it was one LinkedIn search away?
Yeah. Well, yeah, it took no problem finding a LinkedIn search, and I didn't offer to connect with him. But I had information where he lives, the company he works for, matched the company in there. So okay, this name matches these LinkedIn. Cool.
I mean, if you can't get access through the RDP, I mean now you're gathering more information that you can use for your phishing attempts, right? You know their website, you know the company, you know where it's located, you know people, email addresses, usernames. You're gathering all this stuff that you can use as part of your phishing email to make it seem more realistic.
And to go a step further, I didn't show, but the person has a Facebook profile and everything else, so I could easily glean a little bit of personal information about them to make it seem there. I head over to Family Tree now because a lot of the other ones are paid now, and we're cheap. We're doing the script kiddie style. Yeah. We don't even want to buy a subscription to any of the other ones. So Family Tree now is free, and I found this wireless. High probability that is correct. Family Tree now has got some accuracy to it. So now we have another way to send them the phishing link is maybe through text message, because you're less likely to look at a certificate and a text message and grab one of his accounts or something like that, trip them up, send them a gift card. It's almost Christmas, gift card.
Follow up with a phone call. Hey man, I sent you this ticket. It's really urgent. I need you to click it right now. I need you to take a look. You know, we're down, you know, and what would you do if you're an MSP? And I mean, I should just ask you because you are an MSP. If you got like an urgent phone call from somebody who was like panicking and saying like, I sent you an email, we're down, can you open this?
Oh, exactly. And don't put it past them. This is a common attack. They will get involved in there because there's a lot of money at stake here. These ransom they're $100 you're making. I mean, these are some big payouts. So it's worth their time to find someone amongst their team that speaks, because not all of them we realize are probably not likely based here in the US, but they'll find someone who speaks good, clear English and understandable and can talk you through the social engineering part of that.
Yep. I mean, maybe part of my social engineering is getting familiar with your stack even further, right? We started at the high level, which was just what was in Shodan. Several people on the show called out like, look, there's all kinds of great tools for this enumeration, right? Nmap obviously is another free. There's is ZenMap. What's the GUI version of Nmap?
ZenMap. So if you don't want to learn the command line for it, don't worry. This is ZenMap. It runs on top. It's from the same people that wrote the tool, and it runs in Windows or Linux, and it's a nice UI to pop on top of.
OpenVAS is another like vulnerability scanner that you can do to look for this. But this is just a good example of where. Think about it. We have run no Linux tools, nothing that makes us leet at all.
No.
We've been browsing the web.
It was all in the web browser.
And it was, well, once again, it was passive. So I didn't even have to start getting logged. You know, this is just stuff indirectly minimizing, right? So, you know, it wasn't hard to go from there to start looking like
Finder, ConnectWise, Manage.
Right? They have Manage, right? They, looking like they're using a new Ubiquity setup, right?
Yeah, Ubiquity setup. So we find it. Now, here's the crazy thing. This is going to be all they've ever exposed. This was only released a couple of weeks ago, so they do run the latest version of the Unified.
Okay, so they're at least up to date there. Yeah, that's good.
I mean, I think that's realistic, right? I mean, sometimes, especially if automated installations of patches and things are going, like, it's never a surprise to see some places really busted and other places patching. I think very rarely do I run into an IT department that is just so grossly negligent. They're like, patching, suckers. Like, it's always like, I've got real things to do, right?
Oh yeah, everybody wants to patch. Everybody knows they should patch, but finding time for it can be a pain.
Yeah.
So we've got a lot, right? And one of the ways that we always joked about, right? There's ways to pivot. Right. So if I gathered enough of this information about this administrator that we know who's currently logged into that RDP box, start where you're getting creative. So this is actually an MSP shared this with us after our last episode of Tradecraft Tuesday. They said, yeah, you were talking about phishing and all these attempts, thinking like an attacker. What does that mean once again? Well, maybe part of the attacker never realized that phishing was ever going to be in his daily, or her daily routine. It was because it was like, ooh, I hit the jackpot. I think I can start using some of my other tools. So this actually might have brought them to the point where they decided to phish. Maybe the password policies were great. They tried brute forcing. They might have tried a dozen different things that didn't work, only to have to decide I want to phish you. And where I'm going with this is one of the new pieces of tradecraft that we are here sharing. Everybody runs some sort of anti-spam, whether it's the built-in one that kind of works or what are the hot ones? Mimecast.
There's a bunch of them out there.
Proofpoint has theirs. ATP, right? Reflection is from Sober. There's a lot of these options. So one way that stinks, though, is as an attacker, you don't just start your day with checklist. Step 1, I'm going to phish. Step 2, I get credential. Like, it would be great if it always worked that well.
Sure.
But they had to consider what are the problems that they run into. Like, for instance, you might be running anti-phishing. So for those that aren't familiar, this is a screenshot of Microsoft Sway. And if I recall, it's used for like reports, presentations.
Yeah, it's kind of a weird presentation tool Microsoft made.
What's nice about it, though, is anybody with access to Sway or an O365 account that has access to Sway, you're able to post landing pages, post it on office.com. So we see here in this video, we see that this is saying, hey, it's Microsoft Teams. You have a new voicemail from your Microsoft Teams user. So you know, it's probably a safe bet that this MSP was probably using Teams or some type of O365. So maybe they followed up and they said, you know what, I'm going to send this to sway.com. And only from there, when they click on a web page, do I land in my O365 looking fake logon page, which we see what this is, right? This is tulipart.romania, right? Probably not the office login.
Yeah, and this is, like I said, this is what gets through those filters, is the fact that it's a completely valid Microsoft domain that any filtering system you have, even Microsoft's going, yeah, it's a Sway link, cool. Like,
and anybody who looks at that, like, you kind of always tell your users, like, hey, look for the, you know, the lock, look for the green icon to make sure it's like a legitimate page. The problem with this is that had one, right? And not all users are going to realize that, oh, sway.office.com is not where I would go to get, you know, something from my Microsoft Teams, but, you know, with domains and subdomains being cheap and easy, people throw them out there all the time. You can't really expect your users to know and understand all the details of that.
So we got all kinds of ways, all type of ways to think as hackers, and we gave an example in here. Do we maybe take a look at like some Q&A to see what we've got? I see there's at least a couple questions, and definitely some in chat to keep this a little bit more interactive.
So I wanted to say, like, hey, we talked about kind of 3 high-level things as far as external enumeration and discovery. We talked about externally available services and ports. We talked about you know, self-hosted applications, on-premise type stuff, RMM, PSA. We also talked about, you know, getting information. We didn't dig too much into the credential dumps and stuff that you can get from the dark web, like password dumps and that kind of stuff. But one thing I wanted for us to kind of touch on that I feel like we don't have so much in our previous videos is, okay, you told me how to find this stuff. How can I protect myself? Or if I do find it, how do I fix it? How do I make sure it's not there? So anybody want to take a stab at some of these and how we can
yeah, so I think realistic, right? There's been more than one episode where we've said, make sure RDP is not exposed to the external world, but there's reality, right? We're running business. Not all customers are created equally. Some don't see value. Some are on MSAs where they're not paying enough to get extra services or aren't willing to pay enough. So there's various levels of support. I get it. But I think internally within your MSP, you should, that is definitely a place where I would invest effort, right? So the idea of, does my service, for instance, like 20 years ago, we had the white pages that had everybody's phone number in it. And now we're paranoid when a data dump came out and it had our phone numbers. Right. The threat model's changed a little bit, but probably as an MSP, having RDP open directly to the world is bad. On my Screen Connect server or on my Automate server or any type of RMM critical infrastructure, you probably got to look at yourself first, right? Customers, they're not going to self-invest sometimes.
But what can you do about that? Anything?
I mean, for sure, there's stuff like Credential Guard that's out there that could put a layer in front of it. Obviously, we beat 2-factor to death of that's a required thing. I think sometimes that the stuff that really bothers us is when you look at the metrics and you look at brute forcing, even though everybody says, Kyle, I can tell you, we have group policies set on every single computer. You know, they can't log in more than 3 times without locking that account out. We see the ramification of all the brute force attacks and ransomware every Friday, Saturday,
I was going to say, wait, does anybody do that anymore? I don't know if that's true.
Right. So I think one of my call to actions here would be, sometimes you got to take care of your house first, right? Maybe that's what you use your December, right? Tiny IT department, taking care of just your own internal IT. There's no reason that you can't assess yourself, use your IP ranges, get out Nmap. There's infinite numbers of like YouTube videos on this, on how to do this stuff.
It's pretty easy. And you should always like make no exceptions. Like you said, customers may want to have RDP exposed, but you shouldn't. You should always be thinking of privilege, least access here. You want to follow those principles because if it doesn't need to be open, don't open it. Do you need this port open? Is it required or is it just convenient? Think about that. Is it going, well, I like my text to have access to passwords that we have stored in some text file. I don't think anyone would find it because we buried it in our WordPress install or something. Like, I know some things are going to be inconvenient and just don't open it up. Like everything, like VPN, all the things. VPNs are inexpensive. They're easy to deploy here in 2019. That should be, all of your infrastructure should be protected. You are the protector of the protectors. That's you just, as if you're an MSSP or just MSP, either way, you have too many keys to a lot of kingdoms. And that's why we targeted this as finding and pivoting through how we found an MSP running ConnectWise tools, running all this exposed.
Yeah, security is always a trade-off between like more security versus like convenience. You know, the more secure it is, the less convenient it's going to be. So you kind of got to find where that middle ground is. I think a lot of people lean too far to the convenient side, but I wanted to ask you, Tom, since you are an MSP, you have a lot of these tools. How do you deal with, or do you have any suggestions for people who, you know, if they have their own like self-hosted PSA, you know, or self-hosted RMM or any of these kind of tools that they use that they have to host themselves, what are things that they can do to try to like reduce the available footprint there for attackers?
So always RTFM. I know it's inconvenient, but I spend time. I actually, you know, we are a user of Screen Connect. I spend time on their release list, and you can get some. Any of these companies all have different releases, and I stay up to date with it. So I know updated documents. If there's any changes to it, I've read through all the configuration documents to confirm that our configuration is in line with best practices. Reach out to them. They are more than happy. All these companies, the last thing they want is their tool's name getting dragged by you for misconfiguration. Reach out to them, say, hey, can you guys just go over some best practices, stuff like that. And they'll usually, you know, link you to a document. They're like, hey, here's the port you need open. And you may even come to that conclusion. You know, I thought I needed this port open. And I go, oh yeah, about 4 versions ago that was true. This is the updated manual. So just go through that. Also go through the external auditing. You all have an internet connection at home. Go home, scan your business. It's not hard to do. Like we mentioned ZenMap, just do a full exhaustive port scan. See what that reveals about yourself, because sometimes you think you have a firewall port closed, you think you have everything there, maybe you don't. Find out what's linked to you. Look in Shodan, drop your name in there, see if you were indexed in Shodan at all with some of the things
we did this morning to ourselves. We found stuff about ourselves and we were like, oh, got to clean it up. One thing we didn't even share was like, you know, some of the DNS mappings and stuff that we could do. There's all kinds of stuff that you just, you know, a one-off ticket was needed, you misconfigured. Like, it's really hard to catch something like that when you, in well-intentioned, configured something some way. And then it slipped through the cracks, and maybe it's there for a couple of years. Because the difference is, attackers will find this. You know, that same Haroon Mirtalk that I referenced earlier, he actually shared that one of the conversations that caught him off guard the most was with you know, the director of the Tailored Access Organization within NSA. And he said, the reality is NSA knows your internal network better than you do.
That's kind of their job.
That's kind of their job, but like, there's no reason that can't be the case, at least your own internal. There's been some really good comments too in chat too about like, how is there really MSPs that are, you know, not using, you know, VPN and 2-factor, and they're actually exposing RDP?
Well, for themselves, probably not, but for some of their customers, I mean, it's a lot harder, you know, if you have a customer that has like 5 endpoints, selling them a VPN solution it's probably going to be really hard sell, right? They're going to be like, I don't know if I need that. So I could see that. As an MSP, I hope there aren't too many MSPs that are exposing RDP themselves, but we have seen accidental exposure. Yeah, we did see this morning. We have seen accidental exposures in the past where, you know, everything looks good today, but next week somebody's trying to do something and they need to make a change to the firewall, and maybe they make a quick change, or they're testing something and they turn something off and they forget to turn it back on. So it's real easy to be protected today, but not tomorrow. So doing a scan once a year is okay, but it would be really good if you had some tool that was basically like periodically doing the scans. And you can get some of that through Shodan if you do the paid, the $60 a month. Shodan allows you to go in there and add a bunch of IP addresses or ranges of IP addresses, and then you can select and say, hey, I want an alert when any of these things change. And they have all kinds of stuff like SSL certs expiring, new ports or services being available, services no longer being available. So you can kind of get these alerts to your email to say like, hey, you know, this service is now available, and then you can check that and say like, hey, did I intend to expose this or not? So,
and it's, like I said, so minimally easy to set up, and not to mention for $59, that's something you sell to your clients too. Go scan all their networks. They give you like a few thousand IPs you can scan for $59 a month. It's a pretty reasonably priced service. Right? I have no affiliate. We're not plugging them. We just know that they're like low hanging fruit because
you guys are. I'm getting my kickback right now.
Yeah, Kyle's got an affiliate link somewhere.
But it happens, right? I mean, it's one of these things that like you can't be perfect everywhere. There's been a couple questions, by the way, that I'll bring up. One of them is fantastic. It actually calls out like being able to find your own internal threats and things like that, or having people externally find it for you. There's actually a gentleman, Ed Ho, who's actually shared threat intel with us. Great guy in the community, called out that even HackerOne, right, the bug bounty software, they had a bug bounty themselves that somebody externally audited for them and caught them. So like even the people where their jobs that's maintaining bug bounties still have bugs, misconfigurations, accidents. It happens. Huge thanks, Ed, for making that happen. Other people were asking about some of the stuff you could do internal, right? Obviously, there's just as much from the external side that you could do internal. If you could think of one thing, and I know this is off the cuff, but if there was one thing on the internal side of the house that you think maybe you could audit this holiday, right? If it's slowing down.
Oh, I know exactly. Do you have one?
Go ahead.
All right. So the thing that we see all the time is old, unused administration tools that are still there. And we see this a lot, like with MSPs, where an MSP takes over from another MSP. The old MSP didn't uninstall their stuff. The new MSP is just, they're doing what they can to get them on board, and they're moving on. They got tickets. I would suggest you go back through all of your customers and just check and see, are there things there that we don't want there? Old Screen Connect, old RMMs, VNC, all that kind of stuff. We see that a lot. And this applies not just to MSPs, but IT departments, right? If you work at a big company, a lot of times they'll acquire smaller companies, and maybe whatever that smaller company set up is still there. It's just like one of those things you kind of want to go back through and clean house and make sure that, like, oh, it had this thing that doesn't need to be there. Let me get rid of that. Let me get rid of that.
Uninstall the old VNC software that's been.
Wasn't that in that Colorado IT provider? Somebody on Reddit said, not only did their customers get infected, it turns out they had, naturally churned or lost some customers over the year, like it happens, and their product didn't actually get removed. This is all hearsay, so take it with a grain of salt. But according to Reddit, folks were saying, I actually was not a customer and still got encrypted from this exact infection because I used to be and still had my control on that box.
That runs all the tools. Wow.
And so, I mean, think about that from a liability perspective, not just, you as a client, but also you as the provider of services. Like, ouch, man. That's...
Well, even for the new MSP, right? The new MSP technically did nothing wrong other than they didn't go and audit and remove this stuff. But one day they're fine. Next day, their customers are ransomware because of the old MSP, right? Like that puts them in a horrible situation. You don't want that to be you. So yeah, we see that a lot. Old tools that are still around. So I would say, for me personally, that's like number one on my list, because it's really not all that hard, but it's one of those things that you kind of just got to get to.
So one of the questions we got was a single word, and I'm going to screen share this one just because it's ridiculous. So the word or the question of the day was gasolier. And I was like, what are they getting at with this gas? I didn't even know what it was. But
I have no idea where you're going with
I'm going to show you where I'm going with this. So one of the tools and one of my favorite ways of internally auditing that pen testers use, right, is Bloodhound. Its whole job is to gather as much information about an internal network, and then it uses this fancy graph database to be able to find out what are the relationships that go from there. And I think what that question was referring to are, if I look at this lovely gasolier here, since I have to imagine what they're asking, right? They're talking about the prongs. Clearly, that's where this is going. And look at some of the stuff here where it's at. So Bloodhound, right, as I continue to go for this giant stretch, it audits every user that's on a network extracted from Active Directory. It also audits stuff like different endpoints, where the servers are, groups, sessions, ACLs, and relationships. And one of the crazy things is I started reading more and more about what can Bloodhound do. Some of the automated built-in features were like, tell me exactly how many hops I have to compromise to be able to find the Active Directory domain controller, or excuse me, the domain administrator within AD. Or, which computers have which trusts. And take a look at this. These are the built-in queries in it. What's the shortest path to domain admin? Show me users with foreign domain memberships. You know, obviously some of these are all about really large, like, you know, networks that might have trust between domains and stuff like that. But when you talk about hackers think in graphs, like look at this diagram here. Like that is exactly, for those that can't see, let me zoom into this, you know, picture real quick. If I zoom in here, this is what Bloodhound looks like, and it will actually audit and say, this member is a member of this group that can RDP to here, which has a session here, which belongs to domain controller, and that's the keys to the castle. Like that's what we're up against as defenders.
This was actually, this tool was built by a group of pen testers. And one of the things that they had to do, and they kind of go beyond the basic pen testing to what they call adversary emulation. So they're trying to emulate really advanced stuff. And how do I not only get in, but how do I move around? And it's not enough for me to be on like the secretary's laptop or the secretary's workstation. I need to move, and I need to be able to get to the really important stuff, whether that's users or the file systems or whatever. So they built this tool that basically sucks in all kinds of stuff from Active Directory. You know, Kyle was talking about the users, what privileges they have, what groups they're in. They pull in stuff from all the endpoints to say like,
the prongs of the gasoline.
Yeah.
Stretching that one as far as he can. But the idea is they're trying to figure out like, oh, user A has administrative privileges because they're in the local admin group on this machine, and that machine has access to talk to this other machine. And they basically draw those graphs like Kyle was showing where, you know, it says like, okay, for you as an attacker, you have access to this machine. How do you get to whatever you're looking to do? And it basically tells them the path is like, hey, if you can get access on this other machine, or you can get the credentials for this account. And they use that to kind of move through and get to the really interesting stuff. And so I remember when they announced this, and I thought like, wow, that's kind of crazy. And then I actually saw them use it a few times. In presentations and videos they did and stuff, and it's really pretty awesome, like how it works. And that kind of like brings us to like what we were talking about is like the internal lateral movement. You know, we talked about what do attackers see from the outside. You know, that's good, we need to have that, but we don't want to be you know, that candy that's crunchy on the outside and the chewy
soft center,
nothing in the middle, because attackers are going to get in, right? They're going to get that phishing email, they're going to get in. You don't want them to be able to just run rampant in your network. So how do we protect internally, lateral movement, systems behind our firewall, that kind of stuff? So Bloodhound is a great way to figure out what you got going on. Do you have some others?
Yeah, and part of it for me, know thyself, know your network. Yeah. So the way this is how we've internally designed our own network is, one, it's not flat. So things that are more important, we do have some on-prem servers. So they are on a separate network with pinhole access to only the machines that need that level of privilege. So my printer actually cannot talk to the server because it doesn't need to. Right. But then, you know, my computer can talk to the server. The other thing to do is, for example, a lot of people store everything on our network DHCP. Everything is properly named on our network. Everything's DHCP reservations. Mm-hmm. And then a little bit more advanced, but I have a tool called ArtWatch running on the network. What it does is it's watching for anything to change on MAC addresses. If any MAC address has changed, because that could be an indicator of compromise, I'm notified immediately. And someone's trying to spoof your router, someone's trying to spoof a device on a network. It's a little bit more advanced, but watching internally your tool, things like that is huge. Make sure you always are running, I run ZenMap or Nmap, but ZenMap, only one like you mentioned, is a little bit easier. Go through, make a list of everything in your network. Compare that list later when you do it again. Right. Did you get a new device on the network? Right. Did something new come up on there? Because these are the things that people are going to do, because in order to really get access to everything, it takes time sometimes. These are planned because you have 30 days worth of backups. All right, so we're going to stop the backup service, and we have to let it run and not be backing up for 30 days to properly deploy this ransomware. Sometimes you'll find the attackers were sitting there for a little while. So constantly watching you. They mentioned this in data, like sometimes there's ways you kind of get a heads up when you know attackers going to come at you, because you see certain things happening, and a few more phishing emails than usual coming at you, a few attempted login attempts and things like that.
And you'll see some of this with like old devices and stuff. You'll see some of this with like larger organizations. You won't see it so much with like smaller organizations where they have like 5 computers, but you know, if you manage an organization where you have 500 or 5,000 endpoints, it's real easy for like, oh, Bob had this computer that was on his desk, and even though we refreshed, he still needed it. So now he like plugged it in, it's in the corner. no one realizes it's there. It's not getting updates. You know, those are the kind of things that you want to like look for. Is like, hey, what are these old machines? Like, why do I have this? Or we see people a lot where it's like, you know, they had vCenter or vSphere, and they popped up a bunch of different VMs, and you know, maybe somebody used it for testing or whatever, and now it's still there. No one knows if it's critical or if it does anything, but you know, it's an old Windows 7 thing that's not getting updates anymore.
Yeah, and if you don't have GPO policies really locked down, you'll find even on your users networks, you'll find where they opened up a share between some file on a desktop, and of course we share the desktop, and then people like to save their password to the desktop. You can see this is sometimes as a quick pivot. They go, wow, look, they couldn't get into AD, but look, Bob in accounting has his share open on his desktop, and Bob sees all his passwords right there in an Excel file called passwords.
Right.
Yeah, this is something that we have never brought up, but a couple people brought up the questions, and so I thought it was going to be useful to share it here. Since we kind of talked about this thinking like an attacker is understanding how they move and, you know, complete their job. If you take a look at across the top, for those who've never seen this before, this is MITRE's attack framework or attack matrix. And the idea behind it is all kinds of different, almost endless numbers of different attacks. It's almost hard to digest that there's just so much of it. If you can see, the font even gets super tiny.
Yeah, they broke it down so each column is like a category of attacks. Like here we have privilege escalation, persistence, you know, lateral movement, all that kind of stuff.
It's almost like the cyber kill chain
right.
is what it falls
and
through.
then everything under those is like different types of different things that fall under that category.
Where I want to go with is there's endless numbers of inspiration on this matrix. And notice they say for enterprise. That doesn't necessarily mean it has to be only enterprise, but if you start at this level of going for each and individual one of them, say, I want to get complete coverage. I mean, you got your work cut out for you.
Yeah,
there's a lot of things on
luck.
here, but maybe as you start thinking about what is my real risk profile, even if we just focus, and I'll zoom a little bit closer on here, assuming I can.
Nope. There you go.
Right. If we start taking a look where we started with initial access, drive-by compromise, exploit publicly facing applications, you know, replicate the removable media, spear phishing, like those are a handful of the things that we naturally walk through, all the way to the point of talking about how do hackers maintain access, how do they evade. You can pick and choose things in here that are actually obtainable for you. I don't want to say jump into the attack matrix and do them all, because that's crazy.
Right.
It's just a little bit unrealistic, I think.
Yeah. Well, I think the downside to some of this is like these aren't necessarily prioritized in either importance or in like feasibility for me to like mitigate them. Right. So like if I'm looking at this is a massive matrix. Yeah. I don't even know where to start. I think it's kind of the hard problem or the issue I take with like the attack matrices. There's a ton of stuff there. I don't even know where to start.
Yeah. So where we're going with this, and the reason for sharing is, one, I wanted to make sure everybody knew that it was available.
Yeah.
Two, we've kind of walked you through at a high level example of how we as attackers, you know, might have targeted, quote unquote, an MSP without directly targeting them in the sense of, I started with this MSP and I was going to go there, you know, gather their data or phish them or whatever that we accomplished. Gents, we're down to a minute. I'm going to stop the screen sharing for just a second. Yeah. It seems like a good time for either final questions, Q&A. There was some folks that asked about, like you said, RDP, you know, if it was open to the public, but with a GPO, you could set a password.
Is that good enough?
Is it good enough?
No, no, it's not. I think what we were suggesting there is, well, don't open RDP. But a lot of things that we see is people don't have password lockout policies in their group policy. So if something accidentally happens, somebody changes something, a new machine comes on the network and it has RDP open, if there's no password lockout, they can just start brute forcing it. At least if you had a password lockout, that gives you another layer, right? The attacker tries a couple of brute force, oh, they're locked out.
Yep. I mean, if your customer is not willing to pay for anything, they refuse to, and you're looking to maybe, you know, maybe you're on the hook for restoring from backups, but they won't pay for you to harden. Maybe that's the minimum viable that you implement just to keep yourself out of trouble. Definitely not the perfect answer, right, but good enough.
Yeah. Because Bluekeep still it does nothing to mitigate against Bluekeep. Since that came out, it just RDP boxes getting popped all the time because they're probably not patched.
Yeah, there's a lot of surface area in RDP. I would not be surprised to see more vulnerabilities come out of there.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. Tons of resources available. I think we could probably go till we're blue in the face, but we're right at, you know, an hour here into the session. Mm-hmm. gents, did we want to maybe do like one final thought around the room before we sign off? Or we just, I don't really have tons to add other than thinking like an attacker is not an easy thing, right?
The only one we didn't really cover was like shared passwords and common accounts.
Yeah, I'm going to tell you, like, as an attacker, if you want to know the decisions I make, I'm lazy and I look for the path of least resistance. So if you're going to secure your network, I know internally that I eventually need to get administrative access. If you're sharing credentials or sharing admin accounts, the benefit of sharing is you probably don't have two-factor.
Yep.
Look after stuff like that. Use free tools, right? Whether it's Nmap, you know, some of these GPO analyzers, OpenVAST, Shodan, we shared a whole bunch of them. Leverage them to your example, or to your example, leverage them to your advantage.
Yeah.
And I think, Tom, like, you brought a whole lot of reality to this of like, you get to see as an MSP.
We see this stuff, you know, it's not as some people like to think it's too hard. It's not. A lot of it's just closing down the ports, locking it down, going through. It's not like you have to dive into the most complicated and run OpenVAST to figure this out. OpenVAST is cool, but I know that's a little bit more complicated to set up, but just Nmap it. Are your ports open? Until we reconvene in this and find out, oh no, now they've got this really complex attack. Right now, they're just picking people off, going, you know, one at a time, starting with these open ports. At least don't be that. What someone said at the very beginning, you don't get to run fast. You run faster than you when the bear's chasing us. So.
Right. Exactly. So yeah, I think that kind of wraps it up for like the internal stuff. Somebody asked about a SIM. SIMs are great because that's going to collect all of your logs from all of your machines, whether they're you know, internal to you as an MSP or at your clients or wherever. And then you can kind of use those to mine for like new things that are created, new users that are added, that kind of stuff. But the downside to that is, unless you're getting a managed SIM, you got to do it, and you got to do it routinely and periodically. So that's the challenge there, I think, for a SIM.
And that's the same thing with almost all security, right? It's one thing to collect the data. It's a whole other thing to analyze it and make an actual action based on what you discovered.
And not just do it once a year. So, all right, cool. I think that mostly wraps up the topic. I don't think we have any other questions in the
I've got a huge thank you. Obviously, Tom, huge thanks for hanging out with us.
Yeah. I've been here since yesterday. This has been a lot of fun.
Yeah.
So, Tom, I mean, you've got plugs, you've got YouTube, you're all over the place.
Where can people find your stuff?
If you just search Lawrence Systems, you'll find my business or my YouTube channel. They're all intertwined with each other, one and the same. Because every YouTube video I do is also a blog post on my website with all the further links. Because I always, you know, like I was taught in school, show your sources, share your homework. So anytime I cover a topic, I also have a lot of links involved. So I'm pretty easy to find.
Yeah.
And the production value of his YouTube is significantly better than a group of shady cats sitting at a table here. So.
I mean, that's probably true, but we like to keep it informal. We like to, you know, I think honestly, if we tried to do too much formal stuff, we wouldn't end up doing it very much. So yeah, like Kyle said, big thanks to Tom for coming out, hanging with us. Where are we going to be in the future? We're going to be Frankly MSP. We're going to be at PerchyCon. You can check us out at RSA if you're there. Black Hat coming up in the summer. So yeah, if you're interested in talking with us, come see us. We're gonna have a booth. We'll be there hanging out. If you want shirts, stickers, all that kind of stuff, let us know. Come out to the booth. We got a bunch of that stuff. So
got the sticker on my laptop. So.
Tradecraft Tuesday stickers and swag. So all right, does this conclude our December Tradecraft Tuesday?
Yes. So yeah, thanks for coming out, and look forward to seeing you next time.
Yep, let's be on YouTube.